Andy Johnson, this is the Reading Instruction Show. This is a short podcast or video or whatever you want to call it about teaching, quotation marks, reading at home. Hope to answer some of these questions. How can you help your kid at home during this time? Want to provide you some tips for keeping your child engaged, some advice, and then some specific ideas for enhancing reading and fluency as well. I know this is difficult, but there's no magic answers. Keep it simple. Usually the simple things are the best things in education. There is no magic method, no program you need to buy, no best approach. There's just some very simple strategies and tips that can help you. It starts with understanding the basic process the brain uses to create meaning with print. This is key to teaching reading at home. Knowing that reading is not sounding out words. That's traditionally what we thought. Sounding out words. So we give them lots of sounding out word instruction and sounding out word practice, and we measure their ability to sound out words. But that's not what reading is. Think about it. In the microsecond it takes you to recognize a word, to identify a word, do you really, when you see understanding, put sounds to letters, put sounds together, create words, attach words to other words, and create ideas? Do you do that? Does your brain do that in a microsecond? I think not. Reading is creating meaning with print. During this process, almost 10 times more information flows from the cortex down than from the page up. As we take in information, we use 3 cueing systems: phonological, syntactic, and semantic. We'll go over that in a minute. But there's more information coming down than going up. That tells us we use what's in our head with what's on the page to create meaning. Reading is creating meaning with print, not sounding out words. As a matter of fact, effective readers use very few letter cues. When you read that sentence, you did not process every single letter. Your eye went back and forth. You probably landed on 4 to 6 of these words, and your brain filled in the blank. That's what effective readers do. Most of you could read that sentence even though the vowels were taken out. So, how important are those gosh darn vowels anyway? Most of you could read that, especially if you had knowledge of the Green Bay Packers. If you lived in Wisconsin, you are more apt to create meaning with print. If you lived in Boston or someplace else, it probably took you a microsecond or 2 longer. As I said, reading is creating meaning with print. Our brain uses 3 cueing systems as we're reading to recognize the words. It uses semantic cueing system or context that helps us understand. It fills in the blanks. We use syntax, which is grammar and word order, to create meaning, to recognize words. And we use phonics, letter sounds. Of the 3, phonics is the least efficient in terms of space, in short-term memory, and time. And I'll show you that in just a minute. Sounding out a word is different from creating meaning with print. That's the big idea here. An overemphasis on phonics can actually impede students' reading progress because they're focusing just on the one. It slows them down. It makes it difficult and frustrating. I was working with a kid this summer, reading fine, come to a word, all of a sudden stop. They're processing letter by letter. It's taking that child a lot longer. I would tell the child, just say blank and go over. Skip the word. The child will do that, automatically skip the word, a couple words down. Oh, I know what that word is. And they go back and correct. It took far less space and time to skip over and come back than to try to process every single one of those letters. What makes sense within the sentence? Now, an overemphasis on phonics is that's all that you are doing, and you'll impede. Now, these for-profit programs, they'll show you research in quotes. It's not really research, it's just collecting data. You may get a short-term bump in phonics scores, but these skills do not transfer to real life reading situations, and they do not demonstrate the ability to create meaning with print 2, 3, 4 years down the line. Now, this does not mean that phonics should not be taught. Everyone thinks so. It means it should be one of 3 ways used to recognize words, and we need to include activities that develop all 3 of the brain's cueing systems. So, 4 tips for keeping students engaged at home. 4 things that you can do. Number 1, stop correcting mistakes when you're reading stuff out loud. I know you want to jump right in there, but then the child gets very reflexive. Struggling readers especially, they're dealing with emotions. And if you jump right in there and correct them every time, they're going to stop and be hesitant to even make a try, try. Remember, reading is creating meaning, not identifying words. You can read a sentence, not identify a word, but still get the whole meaning of that sentence. So, with your child, teach the child to say blank and keep moving on. Find clues on both sides of the word is what I tell my students, or to ignore it and keep moving on. Try that, or to say nothing. I like saying nothing because the child has the ability to develop metacognition. What makes sense? If we jump right in there, they don't develop this ability to stop and pause and self-correct. We cannot deprive them of that. If the student insists on stopping you and asking, and if they've been overcorrected for too long, that's what they'll do. Say what makes sense, or give it your best guess, or skip it and move on. Never, sound it out. Never ever, I tell you, because it takes up more cognitive space. It slows them down. They focus on letters instead of meaning, and they're already trying to do this. They already know that. So don't do that. 99% of all students already know how to read. What? You're not teaching them to read. They know the process. Letters and sounds and put them together. They're just not very good at it. So think about it. What do you need to do when you're not very good at something? Think about it. Think about it. You practice. Of course you do. You need a little instruction, but a lot of practice. So tip number 2, students need reading practice. Instead of reading class, we should call it reading practice. Like volleyball practice and wrestling practice and piano practice. We need practice, 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 practice. We need that. Now, when they are practicing their reading, the reading materials should be at their independent level or below. Independent level, they can easily recognize 98% or more of the words. We do not want to frustrate and overwhelm students. Many children learn to hate reading and hate reading because it's frustrating. It's humiliating. They get overwhelmed. And think about something when you don't want to do something or you're not very good at it. You get overwhelmed. So independent level or below. Comic books are just fine. Graphic novels are just fine, as long as they are immersed in print. Practice should be regular and consistent. 10 minutes a day is great. 10 minutes for 4 days is 100 times better than 40 minutes for 1 day, because you have that time between to synthesize and process information. So regular and consistent, and I recommend at least 4 days a week. The goal is volume. The more print they can be exposed to and they process, they're practicing, they're exposed to letter patterns and words and sentence structure and concepts, and their brain can more easily learn to recognize things. Our brain is a pattern recognizer. Reading to children is also important. Chapter books are great that are at above their independent level, instructional level. This exposes them to vocabulary words and sentence structure and concepts, all of which promote their ability to read independently. All that stuff is being packed in their brain that helps them create meaning with print, and you help them fall in love with books. That is a teacher's #1 job. You don't teach reading. Most children already know how to do this. As I said, they just can't do it very well. I know how to play the piano. I know you put your letters, each one of those black dots stands for a finger on a key. I know that. I just can't do it very well. I need lots of practice. You are creating the conditions whereby children can develop their ability to create meaning with print. Much like learning to speak and listen, children need to be immersed in print, reading and writing. Read for real purposes, write for real purposes. That is the best way to develop their ability to read. Tip number 3, set weekly goals. Goals could be the number of books read, the number of pages read, or maybe the number of minutes read. I recommend setting goals for minutes read every day. That way you can keep track of it. Start low. 10 minutes a day is great. 4 to 5 days a week, 4 days a week, start with that and build up. After a while, maybe you say, okay, let's go for 12 minutes. Let's bump it up to 15. And if you're doing 15 to 30 minutes for grades 4 and above, that is just fine. That's just fine. If a little of something is good, that doesn't mean a whole bunch more is better. All right? Regular and consistent. But if the child is engaged, you never want to pull up. If the child is enjoying reading, you keep the child reading, of course. You never want to stop. Set aside consistent time for reading practice. Again, 10 minutes a day is fine. 4 to 5 days a week. If you have good books around, and that's one of the problems, the child will read. Make it a family reading time where everyone is doing it. And I know that's tough in these days of COVID. I know it's tough. I can only imagine what people are dealing with. But turn off the phones, the TVs, and other devices, and that is our reading time. They see you reading your book. Now, having access to good books is important. So if you can check out books at a regular time at the school library, community library, if you have access to some online stuff, I use Reading A to Z. They have a bunch of level books. That is one thing. You have to pay a subscription, but that is fine. And having them reread familiar books is okay as well. Teachers' number 1 job is to help children fall in love with books. After that, most of the job is done because they're motivated. They naturally want to read. Now, choice is important. Now, choice doesn't mean total choice all the time. It could be a choice of what to read, a choice to stop reading if you don't like a book. That is important. When to read. Now, choice is sometimes either this or that. Again, it's not total choice all the time. How to read. Want to read standing up, sitting down, wherever. And where to read. All these things. How to read could also be I'm going to read by myself, or am I going to read with a parent or an adult. Keep track of stuff is tip number 4. Daily. Here's the day, the books, the minutes, and the pages. And ideally, if the child could fill this in, that's great. But you want to see what works, and here's where you set and keep this someplace where they have access to it. On a refrigerator or on a file folder, on a computer, someplace where you have regular, so you can see your progress. If you want to keep a bar graph of minutes read, that's kind of cool. Or pages read. Bar graphs are a great way to do that. And again, it could be in a file folder, clip it inside the notebook, on a computer or other. Now here's the other thing. Encourage a rating system of some sort. Here the child lists the title and decides if it's excellent, good, okay, didn't like, or a stinker. Chart, refrigerator. Ideally, it's where more people can see it. If I'm working with a couple of students, I keep it on a community Google Doc so that the conversation around books that takes place, so it can build up, students can see and say, oh, wait a minute, I didn't think it was a stinker. I thought it was okay. Or, oh, that's an excellent book. I want to read that book. Creates conversation, social interaction around books. That's always a good thing. Adopt and adapt. You don't have to use this form, but find some form that works for you. Title, and then a rating of some sort. 4 tips for keeping students engaged. Now, ideas for the child who is highly resistant to reading. Yes, yes, yes. This is what I work with struggling and severely struggling readers. You don't want to overwhelm, so you may want to set specific goals. Today we're going to read just 2 pages. And again, regular, short, consistent practice is much better than more time where the child is off task, frustrated, or humiliated. Having lots of reading material, that is key again. Good books, online, school library, community library, regular access to good books. Now, sometimes the choice is, and I've done this in classrooms, you have the choice. Your choice is to sit there and do nothing or to read. You make the choice. And eventually they all say, well, I'm bored here. I think I'll read. If you have good books that have the choice to sit and do nothing or read, they will read. And then use scaffolded oral reading to provide a scaffold, and I'll show you what this is in just a minute. Scaffolded oral reading or SCORE. Okay, so 3 specific strategies: scaffolded oral reading, SCORE, language experience activities, and really silly stories for fluency. Scaffolded oral reading is when you are reading orally with the child. You're reading out loud. You're just a millisecond ahead of where that child is reading, and you're pointing out the words as you read. You don't pause, you keep moving. You're creating a scaffold to support that child and keep the child moving on. So you're using a quiet voice. You drop out of some words, maybe just provide the beginning sounds of some words. You could do every other. Child read one independently. You use SCORE the next one, every other. Let me show you an example of me actually doing this. Simulate a student. What we do, let's read this together. Now, when we do that, I get just a little ahead of where the student is. I'm just keeping the pace moving. All right? Okay, Betty, let's read this together. Living in Africa, cheetahs speed across Africa's grassy savannas. Cheetahs are the fastest animals on land. Excellent. Yeah. That's the animals, yes. Running makes cheetahs hot. They find a cool place to rest on the savannah. Do you like this book? Should we keep going or should we find it? You like this? Good. Choice is very important. After a page or 2, you always ask, do you want to keep reading or would you like to find another book? Just like you and I, they should be able to choose which book they want to read. And I'll do this maybe 2 or 3 times. All right?
Sometimes when you do a syllable, you go cheetahs.
Cheetahs. Look at this. She is good. Yes. Cheetahs to help them read. Okay, you get the idea there. That is me demonstrating scaffolded oral reading, providing just enough of a scaffold, just a millisecond ahead of the child there. Language experience approach is you have an experience and you write about it. The child dictates, you write. I like to use a computer, 24-point font depending on the age of the child, so they can see the print. And then you reread it until fluency is achieved. So we put the date on the top, and then we write in paragraph form and reread. All right? And here's an example of that. We do it every day. They are practicing reading using words and experiences that they've actually had and concepts that they are familiar with. So this is much easier in the top-down flow of information of creating meaning with print. And then analytic phonics is used. So we read it usually 2 times. I drop out, the child is able to, and they reread it until the child is able to do it independently, fairly fluently. Analytic phonics means we analyze words to look at the sounds and letters. That's how we reinforce it. Bobby, we've been looking at the t sound, the T sound. Do you see any of these? Yes. What words have the tie? Yes. And to? Yep. And another one. What? Very good. There's a word here that has the long A, the A sound in it. What word is that? All right, so you're analyzing. If I was reinforcing the short E sound, we would find short E words. Adopt and adapt. But analytic phonics is analyzing words to reinforce letter sounds with words that they already know. Save on a Word document so you can practice rereading. Usually on Fridays, I like to practice rereading all the stuff that they have written. You can create books and set them aside and they can practice. Students can give you a picture. Your child. A student sent me this picture of her dog, and we wrote about her dog, and all of a sudden she had a book with pictures in that she had written. So you can use pictures, you can take pictures. They can decide what they want to write about. All right, the last one is really silly stories to develop fluency. Now, there's 3 deficit areas in reading. All children are not the same. All struggling readers are not the same. Some struggle with word identification, some with fluency, some with comprehension. You deal with each of these a little bit differently. Some have 2 of these, some deal with all 3 of them. Really Silly Stories focuses on fluency. Fluency is the ability to quickly recognize letter patterns and words and process them. That's what reading fluency is. Really Silly Stories should be 3 to 5 minutes a day. It develops self-efficacy because they have 3 attempts at this and they can see themselves getting better at each attempt with each attempt, and it enhances reading fluency. Now here's a really silly story, and it's called that because it's really silly. It doesn't make sense. Well, it does, but it's just silly. It's stupid, but it's not too stupid that a 3rd, 4th, or 5th grader wouldn't want to do it. The 30th word or 40th word is identified, red and print underline. They read to that and you time them, how long it takes them to get to that 30th or 40th word. They do it 3 times. You record their times each time. They see themselves getting better. Now these have a lot of repetition, a lot of dialogue with which they are familiar, and a lot of sight words. So we're reinforcing these and they're pretty easy. The goal is to develop the brain's ability to recognize letters, letter patterns, and words. Now here's a student. I use this. They started out with 40 words. And you see them getting better 1st time, 2nd time, 3rd time, twice a week for 5 weeks. They were up to 50 words, and you can see the improvement in reading fluency. All right, lots of repetition here, dialogue, sight words. These stories are put into 6 to 10 parts, and they read 1 part each day. It takes 3 to 5 minutes with this thing. They record their 3 times. I like to use a line graph. That's simple. The 3 times, and they can see themselves getting better with each attempt. Some people just want to have numbers. Some kids like using a bar graph. Keep it simple. Keep it simple that you can see. Now, if you want these really silly stories, you go here, readosity.com, and these are free. We're making this available to anyone. You go there, you can see the directions, a instructional video, and here are the stories. Level 1 with 7 parts. Give that a shot. See how it works. You'll find these really silly stories. Hey, Max, said Bob, come here. What do you want, Bob? Max asked. I want you to come over. You see the repetition of words and phrases and dialogue. And they're silly. I did this with a student past couple months. You could see this. This is our starting score, Lexile level, 50 words per minute, word identification, although we weren't working on that. After 14 sessions over 7 weeks, up 440 Lexile level. We moved up a little bit, but you see this dramatic increase in words per minute. This was accompanied by lots of reading practice as well, but a very dramatic increase in words in fluency scores. All right, 3 specific strategies. There you go. Hopefully I answered some of these questions. If you have more questions, there is my email address. You can stop the video and write that down if you want. Send them to me. I'm happy to answer you, or make them a part of my next podcast or video mini lecture. If you want me to deal with any one of these, let me know and I will incorporate that.